Have you ever seen an entire empire collapse because of one silent man? Because of a single indifferent nod during a battle briefing? Today, you will witness how a lone human, with no weapons, no army, used patience and razor-sharp intellect to bring down a force that once ruled 14 star systems. Don't blink, because every tiny detail in this story will leave you stunned. Watch until the very end to uncover the deadly secret behind the silence that shattered an empire. Welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story, where tales of humanity's clash and connection with the stars unfold in love, war, and survival. If you love stories of tactical brilliance, impossible reversals, and raw human determination, make sure to hit like, drop a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next epic battle. And here's a secret code just for you. Comment the quiet wins below if you believe that sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon of all. Story begins. In the endless hush of the command briefing room, General Vex Mora of the Khazar Dominion stood beneath the ghostly glow of a battle hologram, listing off yet another plan destined, in his mind, for effortless victory. He spoke like all conquerors did, not for counsel, not for clarity, but for the sweet music of his own certainty. Around him, veteran commanders nodded on cue, mandibles clicking in ritualistic agreement. Their minds were already past the battle, celebrating victories not yet earned. All except for one. Alex Drake, the human, sat motionless at the curved obsidian table. No notes. No muttered observations. Not even the polite nods expected of underlings who knew better than to think for themselves. His hands were folded neatly, his expression unreadable, like a man waiting not for orders, but for a funeral to conclude. Vex Mora, who had broken a dozen species before lunch on worse days, found his spines twitching in irritation. He waved his four-fingered hand over the map. Proxima Station. Medium-range fighters. 3 capital ships. Resource-starved. Morale broken. Another parade through the ashes of the weak. Still, that silence, that unbearable, screaming human silence, gnawed at him. Commander Drake, Vex said at last, voice vibrating across octaves. You've been unusually quiet. Any thoughts on the approach vector? The human's gaze lifted slowly, a movement so deliberate it might have been meant to offend, and his pale eyes met Vex Mora's compound ones without flinching. The plan is adequate, Drake said, voice flat as a corpse on a gurney. Adequate. The word clanged in the general's mind like a cracked bell. A hush fell. Even the Khazar commanders, drunk on their own smugness, sensed it, the tiny fracture spidering across the facade. Commander Zolgar, ever the sycophant, scuttled into the silence with a sneer. Perhaps our human colleague lacks the vision to appreciate the elegance of your strategy, General. A proper human, one of the emotional, shouting ones, should have bristled at the insult. Should have defended his species, thrown a tantrum, proven he still had blood in his veins. Drake only blinked once, as if considering whether the effort of caring was worth the calories. Then he lowered his gaze back to the hologram, the battle plans, the death so blithely anticipated. Vex Mora cleared his throat, a sound like grinding gravel. Is there something about the plan that concerns you, Commander? Nothing specific, Drake replied. The plan is adequate. There it was again. Adequate. Not brilliant. Not decisive. Adequate, like handing a starving man a moldy crust and expecting gratitude. The commanders fidgeted. Zolgar muttered something about unreliable mammals. Vex Mora fought the instinct to bare his fangs. Very well, the general barked, more harshly than he intended. Prepare your battle groups. We launch in 4 cycles. One by one, the commanders filed out, crossed their arms in the Dominion salute. One by one, they faded into the shadows, content in their arrogance. Drake was the last to stand. His boots tapped against the floor with a maddening precision, like the countdown of a bomb no one had noticed ticking. Only after the doors sealed did Sub-Commander Trulk slither to Vex Mora's side, his face flushed a concerned blue. General, he whispered, humans aren't meant to be quiet. Not before battle. They shout. They rage. The loud ones, you can predict. The quiet ones. Vex Mora waved him off. He knows his place. But deep inside, buried where no subordinate could see, the general wondered. If the human truly knew his place, why did Vex Mora feel like the ground under his feet had started to shift? Why did that single, stupid word, adequate, rattle louder than 1,000 battle cries? Why, in a briefing about death, did one silent human feel like the only one actually mourning what was to come? The battle plan hung over the command deck like a preacher's sermon, grand, intricate, and completely oblivious to reality. General Vex Mora admired it the way an artist might admire a masterpiece he hadn't actually painted. On the shimmering tactical hologram, crimson waves of Dominion forces swept across the blue lines of Alliance defenses at Proxima Station. Textbook flanking maneuvers, calculated superiority of firepower, glorious inevitability. Inevitability. The word tasted like cheap wine now. Still, the others nodded, rows of Khazar veterans wearing their decorations like old, worn-out lies. Each believed this battle would be another star added to their personal legend, another victory to stitch into the ragged banners of an empire too proud to notice the seams unraveling. Vex Mora should have shared their confidence. He tried. He wanted to. But a small voice, one that sounded suspiciously human, kept whispering inside his skull. Adequate. Drake's assessment refused to die. Adequate was the word you used for a crutch that wouldn't break under your weight. Not for a battle plan meant to carve history in blood and triumph. From the bridge of the inevitable conquest, Vex Mora watched the fleet arrange itself into formation, a brutal ballet of engines, weapons, and arrogance. He thought of the first time he'd stepped onto a battlefield, centuries ago. The way the ground trembled under armored boots. The stench of ozone and burning dreams. He had loved it then, the honesty of war. Now war felt like a tax form written in blood, tedious, necessary, and hopelessly corrupt. The tactical officer's voice broke the silence. All groups ready, General. Awaiting your command. Vex Mora drew himself up, armor plates clicking into place. The Dominion would have its victory. The Alliance would be crushed. The human would be proven wrong. He raised his primary arms in the Khazar gesture of fate claiming. Initiate assault sequence. Let history remember this day. Across the void, crimson lights flared. Missiles screamed. Beams of pure energy carved ugly scars across the darkness. For a moment, a glorious, fleeting moment, it looked like the plan would hold. Alliance formations wavered. Shields buckled. Some ships even fled, cowards abandoning the lost. Vex Mora allowed himself a smile. He almost believed again. Then came the first breach. A scout ship, vaporized mid-transmission. A cruiser, caught off guard by a precision strike it shouldn't have faced. Minor setbacks, nothing more. Until Drake's destroyer, the paradigm shift, broke formation. Vex Mora's first instinct was anger. He barked orders, sharp, immediate, absolute. Return to formation. Obey the plan. Trust in the machine of war. But the paradigm shift didn't respond. It slipped through the chaos, accelerating into an empty stretch of void. Empty until it wasn't. From the asteroid belt, that navigational hazard Dominion intelligence had dismissed, emerged shapes. Ships. Dozens. Alliance vessels, cloaked in mineral interference, blooming from the rocks like a gardener's spiteful joke. Vex Mora stared, blood cooling. The trap had been there all along. They hadn't stumbled into it. They'd been led into it. The human had seen. And said nothing. On the tactical display, the Khazar right flank buckled. Commander Zolgar's battle group, mid-maneuver, exposed, shredded by hidden guns. Ships tore apart like fruit under a butcher's knife. Vex Mora roared. Redirect battle groups 2 and 4. Reinforce Sector 7. General, the sensor officer cried, his voice cracking under impossible data. New contacts. Nebula Cloud. Left flank, A second hidden fleet, emerging where no eyes had dared to look. The perfect pincer. The textbook annihilation. Vex Mora realized, in one dizzying heartbeat, that he wasn't leading a victory. He was starring in a lesson plan. And the human was the teacher. He remembered how Drake had sat so still, so silent, while the Khazar boasted and postured. Not indifference. Not fear. Calculation. The Dominion had underestimated a man who could gut an empire without raising his voice. The bridge spun around him. Orders barked became screams. Glorious plans collapsed into desperate survival. In that moment, Vex Mora learned a hard truth. In war, arrogance kills faster than bullets. But self-deception is what buries you. And then files a complaint about the quality of the coffin. At first, it almost worked. The initial volleys from Dominion ships struck like fists across a dinner table, messy but overwhelming. Alliance shields cracked, fighter formations buckled, and tactical officers around Vex Mora cheered with the kind of grim optimism usually reserved for bad gamblers on a hot streak. For 3 whole minutes, it looked like the universe still made sense. 3 minutes longer than most bad ideas get to live. Vex Mora watched the screen, claws tightening behind his back, daring to feel, the old high again. That dangerous lift before gravity remembered you existed. Sector 3 collapsing, General, the tactical officer reported, pride curling in his voice. Casualty ratios favoring Dominion forces 6-1. 6-1. Good odds, if you like betting your future against a loaded gun. Excellent, Vex Mora said, savoring the moment like a man savoring his last breath without realizing it. He gave the order to press the advantage, press it like a boot on a gasping throat. But even as he spoke, the paradigm shift, Drake's ship, peeled away from formation. At first, no one noticed. The noise of battle masked the absence the way loud parties mask missing friends. Only when the right flank began to falter did anyone think to ask, "Where the hell is Drake?" Zooming, the tactical display revealed the ugly truth. The paradigm shift accelerating smoothly, deliberately, away from its assigned position, toward what should have been empty space. Vex Mora's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Open a channel," he barked. The screen flickered. Drake's face appeared, calm, unreadable, maddening. "Commander Drake," Vex Mora snarled. "Return to your position immediately. You're compromising our right." "Can't do that, General," Drake interrupted, his voice as flat as a gravestone. "Observed a pattern. Exploiting it now." Before Vex could spit a reply, the channel snapped off. And then the asteroids moved. Ships, a dozen Alliance vessels, emerged like spiders from cracked stone. Not metaphorically. Not hypothetically. Literally. Camouflage so perfect even Khazar sensors hadn't seen them. Not by accident. By design. The trap closed before anyone could scream. Zolgar's battle group, halfway through a flanking maneuver, got hit first. Caught between shifting asteroids and invisible guns, they fell apart like rotten fruit under hammer blows. On the main display, Dominion vessels twisted, burned, and died with the kind of spectacular incompetence usually reserved for rookie fleets and historical reenactments. And Drake's ship? Still sitting there. Not fighting. Not fleeing. Just watching. Watching like a man watches a campfire he didn't light, but definitely fed. Vex Mora shouted more orders. "Reinforce Sector 7. Abort the flank. Reposition the reserves." Every command felt like throwing sand against a collapsing dam. New contacts appeared from the nebula cloud, striking the newly exposed left flank. Another ambush. Another lesson in humility. Another reminder that the universe had a dark sense of humor. "Commander Drake is holding position between sectors 4 and 5, General," the tactical officer said, voice too tight. "He's observing. Observing. Like a scientist. Or a vulture." Vex Mora realized, belatedly, that Drake must have known about the ambush all along. had sat there in the briefing room, listening to Vex Mora pontificate about glorious strategies, and said nothing. Not because he agreed. Not because he feared. Because he was waiting. Waiting for the parade of pride to march itself off a cliff. Across the battlefield, Khazar forces broke formation. Ships slammed into each other, shields faltering, screams filling comms channels that once carried battle hymns. The general tried to tell himself it wasn't over yet. That the Dominion could adapt. That sheer force would still prevail. But even as he clung to those lies, the screen flickered again. New alliance signatures. New reinforcements. New doom. Vex Mora stared at the tactical map. At the blood-red lines disintegrating. At the slow, inevitable circle tightening around his flagship. He thought of the centuries spent forging an empire through fire and terror. Of the billions who had bled, starved, died screaming in the Dominion's name. Of all the ceremonies and salutes, all the monuments and lies. All undone. By one silent human. It wasn't even the betrayal that hurt the most. It was the realization that the Dominion had made it so damn easy. They had handed the blade to the assassin and politely turned their backs. And they had called it adequate. Chaos spread through the Khazar fleet like a virus, one that fed on arrogance and left only wreckage behind. Commands flew across the comms, desperate, contradictory, increasingly meaningless. Entire battle groups fragmented under pressure they had never been trained to endure. The flanking forces, once so proud, collapsed in a tangle of shattered hulls and drifting bodies. New alliance ships dropped from hyperspace, shimmering like wolves materializing from a hunter's fever dream. They didn't just attack, they anticipated. Every move the Dominion made, the alliance was already there, already waiting, already laughing behind cold, efficient guns. It wasn't just overwhelming force. It was choreography. It was a lesson. And the Dominion was the dunce standing at the front of the classroom, pants down, with no idea when the laughter had started. On the tactical screen, the answer glared back at them with pitiless simplicity. The paradigm shift. Drake's destroyer, still untouched, still perfectly still, a silent judge at a very public execution. General Vex Mora's hands tightened into fists. Rage, humiliation, fear, they curdled together in his gut, a cocktail he hadn't tasted since his first failed skirmish as a young officer. Battle Code Obsidian. The order that meant betrayal. The order that meant no more debates, no more doubts, no more illusions. Tactical priority, paradigm shift, Vex Mora barked. Fire all batteries. Destroy it. Weapons locked. Cruisers pivoted. The Dominion fleet, already bleeding out across half the sector, turned its remaining wrath onto the destroyer commanded by a human mercenary. A mercenary. A parasite. A virus wearing a human face. The first volley struck hard. The space around the paradigm shift boiled with energy signatures. Missiles detonated. Plasma lances slashed like angry gods. For a heartbeat, just one, painful heartbeat, Vex Mora believed it would work. Believed that raw hate could patch the holes in a sinking empire. And then the smoke cleared. And the paradigm shift remained. Not untouched, no, that would have been almost comforting. Instead, the destroyer shimmered behind a translucent field, a rippling distortion in space itself. A mockery of their efforts, a monument to their ignorance. Vex Mora's secondary arms dropped limply to his sides. A whisper escaped him, almost a prayer. Impossible. Drake's face appeared on the screen, calm, relaxed, almost amused. That infuriating ghost of a smile tugged at his mouth, the same expression a gravedigger might wear while quoting poetry to the dead. Quantum displacement field, Drake said, almost conversational. We're not quite here. The words hit harder than any energy beam. Not a shield. Not armor. Displacement. The Dominion had spent centuries perfecting weapons to tear apart matter, and the human had simply stepped sideways out of reality. The bridge fell silent. Even the frantic alarms seemed embarrassed to intrude. Vex Mora wanted to scream. Wanted to tear the consoles apart with his claws. Wanted to punish something, anything, for letting this happen. Instead, he stood frozen, suffocating under the weight of a truth he could no longer deny. The human had never been a mercenary. Never been a subordinate. Never even been a soldier. Drake had been a scalpel, slid precisely between the ribs of an empire too bloated to feel the first cut. On the tactical screen, Dominion vessels spiraled out of control. Alliance ships closed the trap tighter. The inevitable end drew closer, step by step, like a predator savoring its wounded prey. And Drake? He simply stood there, in the flickering light of dying fleets, looking like a man quietly waiting for his coffee to cool. Vex Mora remembered, with a bitterness that tasted like old blood, the first time he had underestimated a human. It had cost him a squad back then. A single, forgettable loss in a career gilded with victories. Now it would cost him an empire. Because under all the armor, all the grand speeches, all the polished boots and shining banners, war was never about numbers or weapons or even strategy. It was about people. About who could watch their dreams collapse and still stand up. About who could hold their silence when everything screamed for attention. About who could wait. And wait. And wait until the world handed them the knife and begged them to use it. Vex Mora glanced one last time at the paradigm shift, still drifting, still serene, still quietly damning everything he had ever believed in. In that moment, he realized that history books wouldn't call this a battle. They'd call it an autopsy. Drake didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He simply explained. The way a surgeon explains to a corpse what went wrong during the procedure. "We've been here for 6 months, Drake said, voice low and maddeningly calm, as if briefing a janitor about a spilled drink. In your shipyards, your research stations, your command centers. Virus by virus. Smile by smile. Handshake by handshake. The humans had crept in like rot under fresh paint, slow and invisible until the structure cracked from within. We studied your doctrines," Drake continued. "Your battle formations. Your emergency protocols. Your blind spots." Each word was another scalpel, cutting away illusions Vex Mora hadn't even realized he wore. Blind spots. How fitting. They had always assumed the enemy would strike from outside. They had never considered the disease might already be breathing their recycled air. Your security checks? Drake allowed himself a small shrug. Useful. Mostly for identifying which of your officers were too lazy to change their passwords. The bridge crew shifted uncomfortably. Vex Mora wanted to rip something out, an eye, a throat, maybe his own heart just to stop feeling it beat so loud in his ears. Your loyalty tests? Drake's smile sharpened, just slightly. Charming. Very thorough, if you're testing species that don't practice deception from childhood. He paused, letting the words sink into the poisoned soil of the general's pride. We do, Drake added simply. We call it playtime. The realization tasted like rusted nails. While the Dominion cataloged human weapons and ships, they had never bothered to catalog something far more dangerous. Human imagination. Because humans didn't follow the rules of war. They rewrote them on cocktail napkins between rounds of drinking games. They didn't think outside the box, they treated the box like a piñata and laughed when candy didn't fall out. Across the bridge, the consoles flickered. The sensor officer's voice cracked with panic. General. Confirmed reports, multiple Dominion installations under attack across the sector. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't even a war. It was a demolition. And the charges had been placed months ago, smiling and nodding, wearing uniforms stitched from lies. You're losing shipyards, Drake said conversationally, as if noting a change in the weather. Supply hubs. Weapons caches. Communications arrays. Each target chosen with a surgeon's precision. Each one vital. Each one bleeding out in perfect, hopeless sync. You thought today was a battle, Drake said, leaning closer to the screen. But it's just the signal. The signal. Vex Mora's claws dug grooves into the polished command railing. The real war wasn't starting today. It had started months ago. Years ago. Today was just the day the body realized the cancer had already eaten the spine. Across the bridge, frantic reports spilled in. Planetary defenses offline. Ammunition depots detonated internally. Civilian protests erupting on core worlds. The Dominion wasn't falling. It had already fallen. It just hadn't hit the ground yet. Vex Mora stared at the man on the screen. This quiet, infuriating, mortal creature who had pulled the ribs out of an empire and left it standing long enough to admire its own hollow chest. "You studied our weapons," Drake said softly. "We studied your minds." And that was the deepest cut of all. Because the Dominion had always believed the mind was irrelevant. That tactics, technology, and terror were enough. That fear could sustain 1,000 cycles of conquest. But humans? Humans knew fear wasn't enough. You had to understand hope. You had to understand why someone would keep fighting even after logic said to lie down and die. Because if you could break hope, not just bodies, then victory wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. A fresh alert blared. Admiral the Sin of the Alliance had transmitted surrender terms. Vex Mora ignored it. His focus remained locked on Drake. This wasn't just a defeat. This was a goddamn magic trick, and Vex Mora was the idiot clapping in the front row, wondering where his watch had gone. The humans hadn't crushed the Dominion. They had hollowed it out from the inside, then politely handed it back like a gift-wrapped coffin. Across the shattered Dominion fleet, defeat spread faster than any enemy weapon. It burned through holes, cut through formations, turned pride into scrap metal and legacy into drifting debris. Crisis after crisis blinked to life on the command screens, until they no longer looked like alerts, just a slow, steady funeral procession in red lights. Shipyards overrun. Military bases silenced. Factories locked down from the inside. Transmission lines jammed with desperate, useless pleas. Some captains tried to rally. Some tried to run. Most simply froze, the realization setting in that they were no longer soldiers fighting a war. They were relics sinking into a sea they hadn't even realized had risen around them. On the bridge of the inevitable conquest, General Vex Mora stood motionless, armor dulled by the light of a dying empire. 14 star systems. 300 battles. 67 brushes with death. And it would all end, not with blood, not with glory, but with a quiet, efficient surrender. "Halt weapons," he ordered, the words thick and foreign in his mouth. "Power down shields. Prepare to surrender protocols." The officers moved automatically, like marionettes with snapped strings. No shouts of defiance. No vows of revenge. Just the numb, trudging finality of men who had finally recognized the smell of their own funeral. Across the fleet, thousands of Dominion soldiers obeyed. Because even pride has a survival instinct, and even cowards, at the end, know when the world has decided their role in history is over. The Alliance accepted the surrender calmly, almost clinically. No cheering. No grand declarations. Just a simple, efficient absorption of what had once been the most terrifying military force in the Orion Spur. Vex Mora watched it happen, feeling the moments peel off his soul like burnt skin. And Drake? The human who had engineered it all? He stood exactly as he had on that first day. Silent. Steady. Still. Watching. Waiting. Not for revenge. Not for gloating. For something far worse. For evolution. "We're not here to destroy you," Drake said finally, voice low and cutting. "We're here to force you to evolve." The words fell into Vex Mora's mind like stones into a dry well. Heavy. Inevitable. Echoing in all the empty places left behind by pride. He thought of the parades, the banners, the triumphant statues. Of the young warriors taught from birth that the Dominion was invincible, inevitable, eternal. Of the enemies broken, the planets burned, the cities turned into ash and footnotes. All of it, every bloody page of it, meant nothing now. Because war had always been a lie. A beautiful, rousing lie designed to cover the simple, human truth. If you don't change, you die. And today, the Dominion had run out of excuses. Run out of justifications. Run out of time. Vex Mora thought about the warriors who had looked up to him. The rookies who had polished their armor twice before their first deployments. The old veterans who had believed loyalty was armor enough against the future. He thought about every wide-eyed recruit who had ever asked him, "Sir, what does it mean to fight for the Dominion?" He wished now he'd answered honestly. It means dying for someone else's mistakes. Across the tactical display, Khazar ships powered down. Shields dropped. Weapons fell silent. On the screen, Admiral Lisin of the Alliance transmitted formal surrender terms. Human, Arcturon, and Vespian officers moved among the Dominion ships, respectful but unrelenting. And through it all, Drake stood there, hands clasped loosely behind his back, a silent monument to patience. Vex Mora hated him. And, in a small, secret place he would never admit even to himself. He respected him too. Because Drake had fought smarter, waited longer, and understood better than any Khazar commander ever had. War wasn't about strength. It wasn't about conquest. It wasn't about pride. It was about survival through change. Through adaptation. Through knowing when to stop roaring and start thinking. A lesson the Dominion had refused to learn. A lesson written now in blood and surrender codes. On the cracked bridge, as systems shut down one by one, Vex Mora closed his compound eyes. He wasn't just surrendering a fleet. He was surrendering a way of life. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't the worst possible ending. Maybe worse would have been clinging to a corpse and calling it a future. Still, as Drake turned to leave, Vex Mora found a bitter, grim smile curving his mandibles. Because if he was going to be remembered as the last general of the Dominion, he might as well embrace the dignity of becoming a very expensive footnote. 6 months later, Vex Mora walked through the sprawling neutral station orbiting the ruins of what had once been the Khazar throne world. The corridors buzzed with life, merchants, diplomats, wanderers, all moving freely through what had been, not long ago, a space policed by the iron fist of Dominion law. Now, the only iron he wore was the dull badge of security liaison, a title as grand as a wet rag and almost as respected. His boots scraped against the polished floors, the sound too small, too human, for a creature bred for war. And then he saw him. Drake. Sitting alone at a viewport table, nursing a steaming cup of something that smelled suspiciously like an insult to coffee. No guards. No grand entourage. Just one quiet human, the same man who had taught an empire to bleed without ever raising his voice. Against his better judgment, Vex Mora approached. His shadow fell across the human, who looked up, blinked once, and offered a small nod. "Officer Vex," Drake said, gesturing to the empty seat opposite him. "Join me?" There was no malice in the offer. No mockery. Just a genuine invitation. That made it worse somehow. Vex sat, the chair creaking under weight that wasn't just physical. He stared at the human for a long moment, searching for cracks, flaws, anything he could claw into. He found none. Just the same frustrating, infuriating calm. "You destroyed everything," Vex said at last. Drake sipped his drink, unbothered. "Incorrect," he replied. "We destroyed what was killing you. You get to build something better now." The word stung more than accusations ever could. Hope, Vex realized bitterly, always hurt worse than hate. "And if we refuse?" Vex growled. "If we rebuild the Dominion? If we sharpen the old blades?" Drake smiled, not cruelly, but with the patience of a man explaining gravity to someone mid-fall. "Then next time," he said softly, "we won't bring a knife. We'll bring a pen. You'll sign your surrender before you even realize you've lost. For a moment, the two sat in silence, surrounded by the low hum of a station rebuilding itself out of the ashes of dead empires. Vex thought about the warriors lost, the pride shattered, the dreams buried under treaties and trading routes. He thought about what it meant to survive but not to win. And about what it meant to finally, truly, lose, not to stronger weapons, but to stronger ideas. You knew, Vex said, voice low, almost a confession. You knew from the beginning. Drake nodded once. The loud ones are easy to predict, he said. The quiet ones, they're thinking 3 moves ahead. A memory stirred, the first briefing, the first chill crawling up Vex Moore's spine at Drake's stillness. The word adequate slipping through the room like a curse. He should have listened then. He hadn't. Now here he was, a security officer on a trading post that sold souvenir t-shirts with slogans like "I survived the Khazar collapse and all I got was this lousy mug." Somewhere deep in Vex's battered pride, a laugh tried to escape. He crushed it. Barely. You broke an empire, Vex said, more statement than accusation. With patience, smiles, and this. He gestured around the station, where former enemies bartered and bickered over bolts and spices instead of blood. Funny thing about humans, Drake said, finishing his drink. We learned a long time ago, you can conquer worlds with guns. But if you want to hold them, he tapped his temple. You have to conquer minds first. Drake stood, slipping a credit chit onto the table to cover his drink. Be seeing you around, Officer Vex. Vex watched him go, feeling a strange, hollow pride stir in his chest. A part of him, the smarter part, knew the future belonged to the quiet ones now. The ones who listened when everyone else roared. The ones who smiled when the knives were already in the air. The ones like Drake. He sat there for a long time, watching the human disappear into the crowd, before finally muttering to no one in particular. Story ending. And that's how an empire crumbled without even realizing it had lost. But now I want to hear from you. If you were General Vex Mora, would you have spotted that dangerous silence in time? Or would you, too, have been swept away by blind pride? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video if you found today's story gripping, and subscribe to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story to join us on more journeys through epic wars and incredible human triumphs. And remember, today's secret code is The Quiet Wins. I'll be looking for your comments down below.